With the Jets playing on Thursday Night Football, the Cleveland Browns game, we have this weird mini lull, a couple of days before we get back into the final week of New York Jets New England Patriots. So, a better time than any to dip our toes into the 2024 draft waters, take a peek at some of the targets and prospects the Jets may be considering, and really talk about the New York Jets draft plans. If you got questions or comments, make sure you drop them in. Without further ado, let's get this party started here on the last day of 2023.
Zoinks! It is unequivocally the Super Bowl for New York Jet fans.
Field Yates, baby. Field Gosh darn Yates. Let's bring him on the show.
Come on, people. Connor Rogers is joining the show. What's up, Connor? But Trevor Gosh darn Sycamore, baby, for me, personally, my favorite New York Jet of all time.
Wow, it's great to be on. What an intro that was right there.
Paul, nobody does an intro like you, man.
Paul, you give the best intro of literally any podcast that I've ever been.
I'm gonna lose my gosh darn bananas.
Good morning, everybody. Paul Esda Jr. here, a.k.a. Boy Frickin' Green, baby. I'm fired up. It's the last day of 2023. Happy holidays to all of you out there that are celebrating. We got the new year coming up tomorrow. Also, maybe squeeze in some New Year's resolutions. I know we'll get that a little bit on the show tomorrow as well. So happy New Year to everybody for joining us. We have a brand new guest joining us here on Boy Green Daily. Long overdue. It's time to bring him in. And a perfect guest for the topic we're discussing with all things draft. So let's bring him in. You know this man. And if you don't, you're about to meet him for the very first time. Let's bring him in. Dom C. Here on the friggin' program. Good morning, Dom.
Boy Green, pleasure. Good morning. I got to wipe the sleep out of my eye. I'm ready to rock, man. And I appreciate you having me on.
Look at that Wesley Walker autographed jersey behind you.
Oh yes, sir. Can't beat it, right?
Is that your most prideful memorabilia item you own?
The one that's down here in my office. I have a game ball signed by Vinny Testaverde.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I mean, Vinny, as short term Vinny was as a Jet, he meant so much for that was my that was my last real faith and push that we had. Then he went down like a sack with that ankle, and it was all done. But anyhow, I have that upstairs in my living room, behind a cage and so on and so forth. The kids mess around down here. I don't want that thing getting ruined with. But that Wesley Walker's kind of special. I like the Rucker. I like the Rucker one too.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Now I see it. Now that I squint, I can see it. Oh, yes. That's a nice one, too. I like the combination of him getting the draft call at Ohio State there. Oh, that's cool. Yeah. That's really cool. I hope, speaking of Rucker real quick, I think one of the underrated positions of need for the Jets this offseason is tight end. Now, I don't think it's among the massive needs, but I think the Jets are going to move on from Uzomah. I love Conklin. He's been on my show a lot of times. I love him a lot. And Rucker has shown flashes, but I don't. So I think he could probably be the Jets tight end 2 for maybe a decade. I think he could be there as a solid guy and step in as tight end 1 when whoever tight end 1 isn't there. But boy, I'd like another person in that room. Agree or disagree?
No, absolutely agree. This is one of the positions that I think the Jets will look to improve, whether it's through the draft or through free agency. I agree in your sentiments with CJ Uzomah, and tight end is historically one of, if not the most, the hardest behind the quarterback position to adjust from the college to pro level. Those are the guys that always take the longest time. So to get a guy, like a Sam Laporta in Detroit to come in and just blow it out of the water is very much an anomaly. So these guys take some time, build into their bodies, play at NFL speed. So I think Ruckert is on that path. But like you said, I think his trajectory is probably going to be a Robin to somebody's Batman. So tight end's an area that I think is a very, very sneaky need.
Again, if you look below, you can see where you can follow him on Twitter. That is DC_NY Jets, baby. Make sure you do so because he is the mastermind, the Scouting Academy alumnus, host of the Draft Dodgers podcast, and owner of some piping hot NFL prospect takes. You can also check out that very YouTube channel that is in the bio on his Twitter account. Speaking of, let's just get this one out of the way because it's been brought up a lot. Currently, the Jets pick number 8, but obviously that's all going to change today with a lot of the results happening here in Week 17. There's no Monday Night Football game, so all of the rest of Week 17 is going to play out today, and then we'll have the final week, and then we'll really get into this. But playing around with the number 8 pick, there's a chance that the Jets could miss out on what I believe is this upper echelon part of the class, and then you're in a position where you're saying, am I taking the 3rd, 4th, 5th at this position, or do I pop the cherry and take potentially the 1st at the position? And a question we get all the time here on the show is Brock Bowers. Tell me about him.
So I'm going to say this. This class in particular, I know that everyone uses the word generational talent way too much. Everyone all of a sudden is generational talent. In this case, I think that there's actually really, really 2 generational players in this draft class.
Okay.
There's Marvin Harris, and as I define generational players, is that we're going to see nobody of this build, of this skill set, of a player of this type for the next 10 to 15 years. Marvin Harrison Jr. is one, just the freakish nature of how his size, his frame, his movement skills, his abilities. He's one. Brock Bowers is clearly the other. All right. Ooh. Brock Bowers classifies as a tight end, which he is, but he isn't. He is first and foremost more of an offensive weapon. Big enough body, at 6'4", 240 pounds. He moves as good as a lot of these wide receivers in this class. He runs full route trees. He can run a stem. He's going to be in the, he's going to be in the low 4.5s in the 40. A very, very good. I mean, not a road grading blocker, but very, very good effort and good execution in his blocks. But the hands and the route chops of as good of a wide receiver. Consider, and this is not a pro comp, but think of how Buffalo utilized Dalton Kincaid as that big slot wide receiver, offensive weapon, middle of the field, zone sitting, weapon right there. Bowers is that plus.
Interesting.
I would not be in the least upset. And I really think this, if you can believe what we saw in one Jets drive last year, where they kind of, hinted at the Jets draft board that included Jamar Gibbs, that included Will McDonald, that included Michael Mayer.
Yeah.
Tight end is something that, I expect if Brock Bowers is on the board, I expect him to be at least there's a conversation having about him. I know it's going to make a lot of Jets fans crazy at this high in the top 10 pick. We can't take a tight end, so on and so forth. But you got to remember, our goal is to put offensive weapons. We've all talked about how we need weapons on this offense. Brock Bowers is exactly that.
Wow. So let me do this. I have yeah, go ahead. You cut out. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was just saying he's a guy that can split out wide. He can split out in the flank. He can line up as the H-back. He can affect the game in affect the offense in a positive manner any way you put him on the field.
Yeah, I don't think this is fair, but I will bring up something that Jet fans often say when I'm like, because this is what I've said. And again, I need to do the Dom C deep dive. I need to take the Scouting Academy with Dom C to fully get the full breath here. But my surface level analysis before we dive in fully in the offseason is, if you have that choice of 3rd, 4th, 5th at a position, or you have a chance to take this offensive weapon as you categorized him, plus you factor in the Aaron Rodgers effect that his presence, high tide rises all boats, that if Brock Bowers is already perceived to be this generational thing, and then you add in the Aaron Rodgers effect, could he have this Sam Laporta leap? There's no offense to Jared Goff, with all due respect, which means we're allowed to say anything. As soon as we say that, I'm like, move over, pal. But the thing that fans bring up all the time is, oh boy, is he another insert? And the inserts I'm going to mention, because I have the NFL draft history here of all these recent first-round tight ends. You mentioned, obviously, Dalton Kincaid as one that we just saw. Kyle Pitts is another popular one that, again, generational is a name that gets thrown around sometimes with some of these guys. TJ Hawkinson was another one. Noah Fant, they both came out of Iowa. That was the same class a bunch of years ago. Hayden Hurst, that doesn't, again, these are just first-round guys. O.J. Howard was one that was apparently in the conversation with the Jets. Evan Ingram and David Njoku were all in that class as well in the first round. So just a handful of examples. A lot of Jet fans bring up the ones that did not work out, like O.J. Howard and others, saying, hey, look, see, if one tight end failed, then no other one can ever succeed in the history of the NFL, which obviously, that's a hard-earned path. How can you, deny that logic? What do you say to those people?
Listen, I think there's valid arguments to be made, and everyone already, especially when we're talking specifically about the Jets now and what we've endured this past year.
Mm-hmm.
I think everyone's kind of already jaded and their goggles are on and understood that, we saw this mishmash of what happened up front in the front five, that nothing else matters, right? I mean, how many times, Paul, have you heard people just screaming, no, I want 4 offensive linemen, the first 4 picks. It doesn't matter, so on and so forth. That's just not realistic, and it's not going to happen. But I understand the mentality, like we've all been there. I think that tight end is, listen, I mean this when I say this, and I'm just a guy, but the kid from Georgia, Bowers, is something different. I'm a huge, full disclosure here, I'm a huge University of Florida fan. Right, I married into a Gator family. My wife, her parents, her brothers, all Gator alumni. So I'm kind of Gator by.
So you were a Kyle Pitts guy.
I was a huge Kyle Pitts guy. My son is an Atlanta My 7-year-old's an Atlanta Falcons fan.
Oh, doesn't that work out?
Because he's a Kyle Pitts fan.
Oh, interesting. Oh, that's funny.
So that being said, I think that I really liked him and his prospect, his unicorn prospect. Brock Bowers rates as a better prospect coming out of college for me than Kyle Pitts did. He's just different, Okay. He runs different. He runs as good and as crisp and sinks his hips and cuts his, and is thorough and agile through his breaks and comes back to the ball as good as most wide receivers in this class.
Okay, let me ask you this. So I've brought up the example to start of potentially taking Brock Bowers if all these other guys are off the board. Again, we're talking about Joe Alt, Fashanu, some of the top quarterbacks, wide receivers, Marvin Harrison, Neighbors maybe, a couple of these guys, and then you're left potentially in this no man's land where you're like, well, take him. But with how much you love him, like back in school, if there was a piece of paper, do you like him or do you, like, what are we talking about here? I'm trying to figure out which one you're going to circle and then fold passes to Johnny. And then they pass it around the room. I want to ask you, would you be willing to take Bowers if some of those players I mentioned are actually on the board and you would take Bowers over those guys? Or is it only in the scenario in which I mentioned where, again, quote unquote, no man's land, for lack of a better word, of those top guys are gone and then you have the ability to crack first at a position? Or would you be willing to do it in another respect?
I like Brock Bowers. I think he's going to be a phenomenal pro. If I'm sitting in Joe Douglas' shoes, I don't know how high up the board he is for me. I would say this. I'd say, we all know the names that definitely would go before him: the Harrisons of the world, the Olu Fashanus, the Joe Alts. The 2 quarterbacks. Some would argue 3. I'll say the 2 quarterbacks. After that, I think I'd have Malik Neighbors. I would choose Malik Neighbors for the Jets before. And I'd have a big discussion about that second tier of tackles and Brock Bowers. Not that I don't think Brock Bowers is going to be good. He's special. He's going to be a phenomenal pro. But for how the Jets are built right now, I'd have that conversation between the likes of Brock Bowers and that second tier of tackles.
All right, let me ask you this, because my father joining in on the fun. A lot of Jet fans are like, "F this, let's trade back. Our second round pick has gone for the Aaron Rodgers trade. If you trade back into the teens, maybe you can recoup that second round pick, maybe more, and you'll have more lottery tickets to fill in some of these holes for the Jets." offensive line. We talked about wide receiver. We talked about tight end. They need another running back. You could probably get that in free agency with a nice veteran, perhaps developmental quarterback, as my father suggests here as another opportunity. Where are you at on the trade back conversation? Because obviously, if you trade back, then you're going to miss out on all these guys that you mentioned. So that's part of the cost. You know, the acquisition cost of backing up is that you're likely giving up the opportunity at some of those guys we've mentioned.
Well, you got to remember this: to trade back, you got to have somebody that wants to trade up, right?
Two to tango, of course.
Yeah, there's two to tango. So depending on how the fall boards or the board falls, I'd be, listen, if you get guys, it really depends on what happens next week. I'm going to say this, because what happens with the New England game? Do we lose New England, and are we stuck in that 5-6 range, or 5, 6, 7, 8 where we are now? Mm-hmm. I probably wouldn't trade back. If we win and then we're in the 10, 11, obviously more guys are going to come off the board, and there's probably that possibility that somebody might want to come up for the first defensive back. Somebody might want to come up for the first or the second edge rusher. So at that point, if you miss that tier of guys, those 5 that we talked, the 5 names that everyone knows about, and then maybe like the Malik Neighbors or that second tier of tackles or something like that I fully expect to go off in that top 10 range. I think for me, trading back would be and accumulating more capital would be the move. Hopefully there's somebody wants to trade up for, right? People trade up for quarterbacks and premier positions, right? Quarterbacks is edge, and cornerbacks usually are what get traded up for. So it depends really who falls on the board. I would be surprised. This is not going to go over well in Jets world. I wouldn't be surprised if either, I don't know if at the draft or before the draft, if that little trade chip in Bryce Huff is utilized to recapture some draft capital.
What could he garner? What do you think? I
think he'll get a second round pick. I know he didn't do it last year. Anybody could have had him for a second round pick last year.
Yeah, RFA tender, absolutely.
With the tender, anyone could have had him for the second round pick. I think he proved and showed how much of a force he is on defense, and depending on how things fall, if they need to recoup that pick, I think that he and they can't really hammer out an agreement. It might be one of those deals where he's the trade chip. He's what gets you that extra draft capital. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, that's a massive decision, a big decision for the Jets coming up, because we'll see. The contract money has been funky. There have been people who have talked all over the wazoo. Randy Mueller, good friend of the program, former NFL GM, he had Huff a couple of months ago with Asman in the $22 million per year range. I'm like, wow, that is massive Mondo money. Others have argued like a Carl Lawson kind of package. Again, the same sort of things, analytically driven, no double-digit sack seasons, but you can see the potential of $15 million per year average. So the numbers have been all over the place. So that'll be kind of fascinating. Plus age, obviously, potentially hitting the market as a 25-year-old, and I'm sure that could be spicy as well. So interesting.
Well, I think it's also going to depend on what happens with the rest of the free agent market, right? Do we fix do we throw some big money at some of these big name free agent wide receivers and try to fix other areas through the draft? Do we go after, and I'm just throwing out a name. This is, Tyron Smith might be the biggest free agent tackle name.
Oh, yeah.
And he's going to cost some money. Do you pay there and have to make do elsewhere? And that takes up Bryce Huff money. It's crazy.
Okay, let me just ask you this. I know you have a crystal ball under that table over there, so let me just ask you. Hey, can you just grab it out and tell us we're taking pass rusher Jared Verse? Is that just exactly what's happening?
Listen. After the Will McDonald pick, which I love the player, anything is possible. I'll never say, no way, we are not taking this position.
Oh, boy, if that happens.
After that draft pick, anything is possible, man.
Who did you want at that point?
I was on board. I was really interested in 2 guys. I thought I was a really big fan of Kalijah Cansey, the defensive tackle.
I was too. Loved him.
He was the guy I want. I thought that he would have been that a great compliment next to Quinnen in that pass rush. I mean, that's what he does. He goes this way and at the quarterback. And then falling off, I was very big. My third tackle in that class was Anton Harrison, the kid out of
Ooh, okay.
Oklahoma.
All right.
I thought it was a little too early to take him at 15, and
Yeah.
ultimately it was. Jacksonville took him at 26.
Mhm.
He's having a stellar year for them down there. So those are the two guys I was hammering in on. I was not team Jackson Smith and Jigba like a lot of people were. So
You were
on and so
not
forth.
JSN. How
I
dare
was-
you? You're un-American.
I was-
Unbelievable.
I was not very I was a little tepid on the entire wide receiver, that first round wide receiver class as a whole. I think
And
I
look
had
at them.
I
Zay
think I had
Flowers, Addison. It's been spectacular.
Addison. I was a fan of. The rest of them, none of them I had a first round grade on. So
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, to be honest, I wasn't as high either. Once you got past, I kind of was like, Again, I wanted JSN because I'm like, well, again, same sort of thing. You evaluate your current situation. I think I tweeted it out right before the draft. And my three players were that I wanted was Skoronski. I believe it was Skoronski, JSN, or Kalijah Cansey. If the Jets
Yeah.
walk away with one of those three, I feel
Yeah.
phenomenal.
yeah, well, Skoronski, I thought Skoronski was all world. I loved him, but he went off the board early. And that's
like
when I kind of
11-ish.
and that's when I kind of honed in on Kalijah Cansey. I just loved the game and rooting for an underdog. Who doesn't like a 6'1", 290-pound defensive tackle? You know what I mean?
Exactly. Right. That would have been pretty cool. Let me ask you this before we get you out of here. Then we're just going to have to bring you back, Domsey. We're just going to have to bring you back because there's too many questions and so little time to answer
Listen,
all these.
I will. I'll be glad to come on. I'll be down at the Senior Bowl again this year.
Ooh.
So if you want some spicy takes when I get back, we can chat.
Okay, there it is. So we're doing live shows from the Senior Bowl. Phenomenal. What a commitment by Domsey on the show. Let me ask you about the offensive line thing. Is it Joe Alt and Fashanu and then everybody else? Is that line? Can that line move? Should that line be moved? Because that's how it seems to be among Jet fans. It's those two or bust.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, I think those two are the two biggest names and the ones that are going to stand out. But I liken the top of this class to the 2020 class. Okay.
Okay.
So Olafusha and these are not true player comps, but just as prospects, like kind of some similarities that I saw. Because when I say one, you guys are gonna sour on him automatically. But Olufushanu is the Andrew Thomas of this class. Long, lean, very very sound in his movements and his skills. Excellent, the best pure pass blocker of the bunch. Just turned 21. A lot of similarities to Andrew Thomas. Not the greatest against the run, especially in the phone booth or at the point of attack. Doesn't drive as much, but can get better, just like Andrew Thomas did. So that's where you're at here. And I liken Joe Alt to the kid from Cleveland. Why am I drawing a blank?
Oh, Jedrick Wills?
Jedrick Wills, yeah. So Jedrick Wills coming out of college.
Okay.
Left, right flexibility. Kind of do it all. An absolute dog in the run game, right? Like a vicious finisher in his blocks, mean. Did everything good. Coming out of college, didn't have maybe not as high of a ceiling as Olufushanu, and that's true for Joe Alt. But probably a little bit higher of a floor. He's not gonna. There's a really safe spot for Joe Alt. I know Jedrick Wills' career kind of got sidetracked with injuries and so on and so forth. Didn't pan out well, but a lot of similarities there. Then you have Talisi Fuaga. Talisi Fuaga is Tristan Wirfs, man. Kind of
interesting.
Kind of sliding under the radar. Probably the most pro-ready guy that you have here. Has that weight room strength. That just transfers into his game, is truly a pure right tackle. Probably not going to move over. And again, if you remember going back to 2020, Paul, the question on Wirfs was he's good, but he can only play the right side, right? And a lot of people thought that he would end up like an all-world inside player, like a guard. Tristan Wirfs has proved us wrong, but fundamentally sound, strong, a vicious punch. Phenomenal athlete. That's Talisi Fuaga, the kid from Oregon State. At 6'6", 340 pounds, he moves like a gazelle. And you could just see him in space, vicious, strong, an absolute mauler in the run game. Has some tendencies, some balance issues. So probably and it doesn't have that ideal, that ideal length, especially in the arms, to probably handle the left side. I think that he's a right tackle. I think that he could probably, at absolute worst, he's going to be, an all-world guard. But I think he's going to have the chops to stay at tackle. Probably the most pro-ready. Probably the one that I think all four of these guys I'm going to talk about are plug and play, but he's the one that's probably going to transition the easiest.
All right, there he is. Chris jumping in on Twitter. I'll say this. I tweeted it out yesterday, and from everything I've gathered about that 2020 class, from what I understand from a Jets perspective, one of the main reasons that they took Becton over Wirfs was that left tackle, right tackle thing you just said.
Yeah.
Although, again, with that being said and hearing that, it sort of doesn't make sense because a few weeks earlier they had signed George Fant, who signed under the belief he was told by the Jets. That's what he has said publicly. You're signing to be the left tackle. So for them to weeks later take Mekhi Becton to be left tackle and shove his ass to right tackle, I mean, poor Fant, they just straight up lied to Fant, apparently. Because if that was true, what Fant is saying, I don't know why he would lie, because then other Jets people could come out and say he's a liar too. So I don't know what would be the benefit of that. But if he was truly the left tackle, then there would have been no reason to not take Wirfs. Okay, Fant, you're a left tackle. Boom, Wirfs, you're a right tackle. But that's what I've heard is the reason, one of the main reasons the Jets didn't take him. And funny in your face, Tristan Wirfs ended up transitioning to left tackle anyway, you idiots.
I know.
So,
I know.
It's
that doesn't like that. 1 and 1 don't kind of add up to 2 in what you're saying. And I believe what you're saying.
Yeah.
Connor Hughes comes out yesterday and says that Wirfs wasn't even on Joe Douglas's board. And
I missed that. I missed that tweet. Wow.
Yeah, he said that if Mekhi Becton was off the board, that Henry Ruggs would have been the pick.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Well, and listen, and that blew Twitter up a little bit. But, yeah, Henry Ruggs was, as I'm going to say this. I'm going to say it on your channel, and I mean it, and I own it. And this is your receipts. Henry Ruggs was as good of a prospect coming out of college as CeeDee Lamb. Wow. They were the two big wide receivers. Henry Ruggs was that good. Henry Ruggs had that special gear or something like that. And, God rest his soul, or not, he's not dead, but, God rest his career. He kind of stepped into a little doo-doo.
Yeah, that's for sure. We'll see if he ever gets out of prison for everything that occurred with that situation. We'll end on this, Dom C.
Yes,
we just brought up the 2020 draft a lot, obviously throughout this show. And in 2020, the debate in Jets Twitter land for months was offensive tackle or wide receiver. In that class, I freaking fell head over heels for CeeDee Lamb. However, I loved him. I said, oh, man, this guy's going to be a freaking stud. But I removed myself as a Jets fan, and I said to myself, there is no way Joe Douglas, former offensive lineman, is taking CeeDee Lamb with his first ever draft pick with the Jets. I just don't see it. I would love for it to happen. I hope he proves me wrong. I will order that jersey faster than anything in the nature of everything that's holy. But I just kind of told myself, Paul, don't fall in love. You don't want to get your heart hurt. It's not going to happen, pal. It's going to be one of the top 4 offensive tackles if one of them falls to the Jets. If not, okay, all hell can break loose, and maybe you get your lamb chop as you're hoping for, Paul, as I'm talking to myself in a weird third-person scenario. And then ultimately they go offensive line. So my question to you is it 2020 all over again? Is that the debate? Putting like a Brock Bowers aside, is it offensive tackle or wide receiver outside of a trade back? Is that the scenario wherever the Jets end up picking? Is it 2020 all over again?
Yeah, I'd probably say it absolutely is. I mean, listen, you don't know what's going to happen in free agency.
Sure.
We can't, the crystal ball doesn't work that good for me over here in Jersey. But, it's going to be that debate. And if I had to kind of lean one way or put my shekels on one side, I would probably lean towards the offensive lineman.
Okay, as would I, because again, Joe Douglas and I can't believe he's in his 5th year. He's going to be heading into the contract year of that crazy 6-year deal as a former offensive lineman. And as we saw it painfully this year, you got to build that wall around Aaron Rodgers to have a chance. And I would imagine, again, we don't know about free agency and what's going to happen there, but your clearest path is drafting your own guy and having him under, relatively speaking, cheap team control for the foreseeable future at a key building block piece, left tackle, right tackle, or God knows what it is. So we'll see what happens. Again, the wide receivers would be sexy, but that would be interesting.
Well,
Yeah,
you also got to remember this part. There's this into it. Forget about additional draft capital. Where we stand right now in the first round, third round, 2/4. Right. This is one of the deeper wide receiver classes that we've had in a long time. You're going to get viable guys who can come in and play. Maybe not, even some starters, or, if not year 1, year 2 in rounds 3 and 4 in this draft class. Whereas the tackle class, in my opinion, is very top heavy. There's a top 4, 5 if Amarius Mims from Georgia declares. So after the first 5 guys, those guys in the latter half, the 6 through 10, there's still some question marks, and then it just falls off
I think
draft class. Yeah. What happened?
No. Yeah, you cut out again. Sorry. No, go ahead.
No, I think that the draft class, there's going to be better depth at wide receiver later.
Yeah, well, sign me up then. Maybe that is ultimately the path for the Jets. My father commenting in again. He is a diehard Dallas Cowboys fan. Last night, good thing you guys dodged that CeeDee Lamb bullet. Thanks, Dad, you bastard. Now, I will say this. So that's unfortunate. I really love CeeDee Lamb. The good news is I'm in 2 fantasy championship games this weekend with the fantasy football, trophy and everything on the line. In one of the leagues, I got CeeDee Lamb. Not too shabby with the 200-plus yards last night and that 92-yarder. Thank you, CeeDee Lamb. Thank you, Lamb Chop, for that one. Appreciate it. So hopefully we can bring home a couple of chips later today. Dom C, before we get you out of here, come on, do a shameless plug. Where can people hit you up and find more juicy takes, which you've provided a few sizzling ones fresh off the fryer?
Yeah, like I said, I have a YouTube channel out. It's relatively new, guys. Project Prospect with Dom C. Search it on YouTube. Got a couple podcasts going out. I also co-host, for all you Jets fans, I co-host the 10 o'clock mock on Green Bean Jets fan channel. That will be starting once the season's over. And that can be found at Green Bean Jets fan YouTube channel. I'm very active on Twitter. Drop a DM. Leave a message on any of my videos. I love to commiserate with Jets fans, and then even more so talk draft. I got a draft guide coming out. There's a lot of good things coming out in Dom C world.
Okay. Well, thanks for letting us in, Dom C. Again, we're in this weird day of, of course, there's a Patriot logo below your head, but I think we're really going to get into that tomorrow on the program and everything else. So we kind of have this weird upside down, which quite frankly feels like the entire Jets season in some respects, but it's specifically today. There's this weird upside down as we can all kind of sit back and watch football with no real skin in the game outside of my fantasy championships again. Another shameless plug. So Dom C, phenomenal. Thanks for taking the time, brother. The fans really got into it in the comment section. Appreciate you.
My pleasure, man. My pleasure. Draft season's upon us, so we'll talk more, Paul, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Like I said, tomorrow with Italy Jet, we'll kick off Jets-Patriots week. A lot to get into there. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Take care.